Well, I did travel to Ecuador and Colombia and Peru. This was an Andean tour, and in each of the countries I was able to meet with the president as well as with the foreign ministers. Although in some ways what I enjoyed most about the trip was to meet with embassy people in each one of the embassies, U.S. embassy that is, but also to speak to university students. I'm a college professor, so I enjoy doing that. And to visit some projects that the United States government supports through AID and through other initiatives in various places. And so it was a great trip. In Colombia, for example, I was able to visit an extraordinary project with a private foundation that helps Afro-Colombians who've been displaced because of the conflict in Colombia, the narco-trafficking conflict in that country, and who are trying to essentially get their lives in order, and very, 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 very poor people. But this foundation is a wonder foundation. It's called Little Grains of Hope. That's the name of the foundation. And it was very moving to see what they do. And in the Peruvian Andes, I was able to go actually down into the jungle area in the Upper Guayaga in northern Peru to see an absolutely phenomenal alternative development project where, with assistance from the United States government, through various different agencies, peasants that used to grow coca in this area of Peru are now growing cacao. And in fact, not only are they growing cacao, but they're also producing their own chocolate. And one of the cooperatives there of about 1,500 peasants won a prize recently in Paris for the quality of their chocolates. And they also produce coffee and various other sorts of things. This is what we need to do. And the main theme of the trip was to talk to leaders in each of these places on how we can move ahead on things like social inclusion, poverty alleviation, making sure that our populations are more competitive, which means investment in infrastructure, investment in human capital and education and that sort of thing. At the same time, work more effectively together on the things that are really complicated, such as public insecurity, the drug trafficking, criminal violence, and things like that, which have really affected these countries in a major way. Yes, Rafael Correa, the president of Ecuador, is an interesting gentleman. He has a PhD in economics from the University of Illinois, and in fact, 2 days after I visited with him, he traveled to Illinois to receive an award by the University of Illinois because he's one of the most distinguished graduates. He's a man who was elected with a significantly large majority support in Ecuador. He has a program of social change that he wants to implement. And we had frank conversations. On some things we agree, on some things we disagree. We didn't really disagree on the objectives that we try to pursue as countries. We both share this commitment to trying to see how we can cooperate better, how we can work more effectively to address the problems of our societies. And in the case of Ecuador, for example, we have very good cooperation on counter-narcotics efforts. Ecuador is next to Colombia, and they're affected significantly by the drug trade, even though they don't produce coca in Ecuador. You know, I raised some concerns with President Correa about Iran. He's been in conversations with Iran as he's been looking for investments and made clear that the United States is extremely worried about relationships with countries with Iran, given Iran's violations of some of its responsibilities internationally and the condemnation that rightly Iran has received from the UN Security Council, and it's the fact that it's not cooperating with the International Atomic Energy Commission. We also discussed some things that concern us about freedom of the press in Ecuador, and the concerns that the majority governments sometimes don't necessarily protect minority rights. But we had a frank conversation. It was a cordial conversation. It was a respectful conversation. That's how I've, in all my trips, said the Obama administration wants to deal with our Latin America policy. This is not about trying to beat up on people willy-nilly. We want to try to engage, but being very, very clear, too, what our fundamental principles and what our fundamental objectives are. The students were interested in a broad range of concerns. They're interested themselves in what they might want to do in the world. In Ecuador, I had a lot of questions from students who wanted to know about the opportunities they might have to come to study in the United States, what fields they ought to study. They're obviously interested very much in international affairs. And in Ecuador in particular, it was kind of fun because I spoke to a university that had a campus in Quito, so I was speaking to some people there, but also through video conferencing I was speaking to some of the other campuses. And so we had a good conversation. They're concerned, obviously, about issues of poverty, inequality, the drug trade, and that kind of thing. And they also asked questions, international questions. They asked about Iran, for example, and I tried to explain what the United States' position is. Let me just say that in all three countries I was able to meet with the foreign ministers as well as with the presidents. And I had an equally good meeting with President Uribe in Colombia and his team. As you know, President Uribe is leaving office soon. It's extraordinary. He has 80% approval ratings. He's done a tremendous job in reversing a very difficult situation in Colombia. Colombia is a much more secure country. But, you know, he's leaving office because the Constitutional Court there said that he could not go on for another term. And Colombia is such an example where the rule of law and where institutions are working well. And where a president decides, even though he's very popular, that in fact at the end of his term he does step down. And in Peru I met with President Garcia, who's also done an extraordinarily good job. Peru's had very high economic growth rates recently, although they have problems in some of the jungle areas, for example, with degradation of tropical forests. And that's one of the things that I looked at there. But as you asked in your question, in Colombia, I did go to Cartagena to the World Economic Forum and participated in a panel there with several other leaders and with business leaders from all over Latin America discussing international problems. So it was a great opportunity for me to also give our message, that is, of the United States, reaching out to Latin America to have stronger partnerships with all of our neighbors in the hemisphere in order to resolve the problems that we all think we can resolve together. So I'm very optimistic about this trip.